Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Chof Hey Amud Aleph. 2 lines from the bottom at the new Mishnah. Our Mishnah continues to discuss the topic of muktzah and even items that are a muktzah status of machmas gufoy, like a stone or a vine. They can sometimes be made into a kli that can be then moved on Shabbos. The Mishnah discusses a case at first of an evan that is put into a pumpkin that is hollowed out. A person wants to then draw water from a well with the pumpkin as a kli, as like a pail. And therefore, the pail, this case, the kli, as a pumpkin, a hollowed out pumpkin, is light, whereby it would float on the water. So if one puts a stone on top of the pumpkin, then this hollowed out pumpkin will then have weighted down and can be used to draw out the water. So the Mishnah says, Ha'even shebekeruya, if a person puts a stone on this hollowed out pumpkin, imemalin bo ve'enoifeles memalin bo. If it's going to be such a situation where when you then draw the water, the stone remains on the pumpkin, that means it's fastened into the pumpkin to then weigh down the pumpkin shell so that then water can be drawn onto it, then you could go ahead and metaltel that. It's a good kli. V'im lav ein malin lo. But if it's not able to then maintain fastened on the pumpkin, on the shell itself, then it's not going to be a valuable kli because it'll then fall off, whereby it won't then provide any benefit to draw the water into this shell. In other words, the stone will then remain just a place where then it's being stored inside the pumpkin, and therefore it will be muktzah. Daf Kufchei Chafhei Amud Beis at the top brings another case. Zemara shehi kishura betafiach. A person similarly wants to then draw water from a well, so he attaches a zmura, a vine, to a small jug. Mimalin bo b'Shabbos. He can go ahead and use that, and we can say then that vine, which normally has again the status of muktzah machmas gufoy and cannot be then moved, here it's made into a kli, and therefore you can go ahead and metaltel it on Shabbos. The Mishnah now turns its focus to a different topic altogether. In fact, in the Mishnayos, they're taught separately as a separate Mishnah. Pekak hachaloin, here it's discussing the inyan of oil. When it comes to binyan, we know binyan is a malacha of boine on Shabbos. So too, an oil that is kavua, an oil keva, that's going to be an oil that will remain for a fixed period of time. That will also be a malacha of boine, a tolda malacha di araisa. A oil arai, if a person builds an oil arai, for example, he has 4 pillars, and he just puts on top, on Shabbos, a tarp to get then protection from the sun. That's an oil arai, and that's going to be also midirabbanon. Our Mishnah is discussing, what about that person is moisif on a binyan or on an oil? Is that considered to be part and parcel of the takana of being of making oil arai or not? Says the Mishnah, Pekak hachaloin. If you have a chalon, a window, and you want to then close it, right, making a shutter in the window by covering it, let's say, with a piece of wood. So it depends. Rabbi Eliezer oimer bizman shehu kosher v'toilui poiking boy. If this piece of wood is both tied to the building and also to, let's say, to the wall, and also it hangs so that it's not dragging on the floor, then you say it's part of the building, and therefore he's merely then putting it back onto the chalon to close the chalon, but he's not adding onto the building, and therefore that's mutter. However, v'im lav ein poikekin boy. But if not, then we say it's considered to be part of the takana of making being moistif on an oil arai, and therefore it's also. It's part of the takana of asiyas oil arai, and therefore it's aser. The Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer and they say whether it's tied and hanging or not, still we don't have that takana of being moisif and part of the moisif on a binyan as being part of the malacha of an oil arai. In other words, here they're saying unless you're actually putting a fixed piece that is going to remain on the building or on the oil, only then that would be osir. But to say that you're taking a hoisafa on the binyan or on the oil, and that's part of the takana of building an oil arai, that the Chachamim say is not so. The Mishnah, the Gemara now brings the first part of the Mishnah, Reisha, Tnan Hasam, quoting a Mishnah later on to discuss our Mishnah. It says later on in Masechet Shabbat, Even sha'al pi chavis, mate al tzida v'hinoi feles. If a person has a chavis, and on that chavis, he covered it, he put it a stone on the chavis. He merely placed the stone on the chavis before Shabbos, and now it's Shabbos, and he wants to get to the contents of that chavis. He wants to get to the wine inside. So it says over here in the Mishnah that he can go ahead and tilt the chavis, and then the stone will fall, whereby he can go ahead and then pour wine into wherever he wants in his pitcher. Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo shanu ela b'shoicheach, ava b'meniach nases bosis ledavar ha'aser. Rav Ami teaches, this is Rab in the name of Rav Ami, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, teaches that this case that we're talking about, where if a person, let's say, even has a chavis that's amongst other chavios, and he's afraid that if he would just tilt the chavis that he wants to use, the stone will fall and break on another chavis nearby, he can go ahead and pick up the chavis, carry it to a safer place, and then tilt the chavis so that the stone will fall off, and then he can then go ahead and use the wine inside the chavis. So Rabbah, in the name of Ami, in the name of Yochanan, says all of this is talking about if he was shocheach, if he forgot the stone on top of the chavis before Shabbos. Then he can go ahead and then pick up the chavis, take it to a safe place, and then tilt it and get rid of the stone that way. But he says, Aval b'meiniach, if he placed it purposely before Shabbos on top of the chavis, then that chavis becomes a basis ledavar ha'aser. And the same way that you cannot metaltil the stone because it's muktzah machmas gufoy, similarly the basis, that means the chavis that is holding as a base for this stone, can also not be moved. Rav Yosef Amar Rav Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Yosef said the name of Asi, also the name of Yochanan. Lo shonu ela b'shoicheach, aval b'meiniach nase kisui lachavis. He says, we're talking about over here again that he forgot the stone. That's the same as what we learned before in the name of Rav Ami, in the name of Rav Yochanan, that he forgot the stone, and that's why he can go ahead and carry it. But unlike that which Rav Ami said to Rav Yochanan before, that if he was meiniach the stone, then it would be a basis davar also. You could not then move the chavis. Here, Rav Asi says the name Rabbi Yochanan, that if he placed the stone on the chavis before Shabbos, then it would be a kisui to the chavis. That means the mere placement of the stone makes it so that it's a kli, and therefore he can go ahead and take off the stone with his hand, be metaltil the stone in a regular fashion, because like any other kli, you can metaltil. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi who taught the first statement in the name of Ami, in the name of Yochanan, that if he did it b'mezid, then it would leave the stone b'mezid, then it would be a klish that is going to be a basis for the stone, and you cannot move the chavis. Mosvin ashmaitzin, we can ask on our halacha from our Mishnah, ha'evan shepikri keruya imemalim ba ve'ena noifeles. Memalim ba. Our Mishnah states that if you have, we said, a hollowed out pumpkin shell, and you want to use that to draw water with, so you can put a stone inside of it. If it's fastened, then go ahead, you can put the stone in it and draw water. And thereby we see that a stone that is placed inside of in this case, of a shell, that itself is not muktzah. So the very mere placement is enough. Similarly, then, it should be then when you place the stone on the chavis, and yet it's a kasha l'chara on me, because Rabbah says that I taught that indeed that is now a basir davar ha'aser. Velohi, but it's not a kasha, explains, because Hasam kivan the hadka shavya doifen. Since he fastened it, he didn't just put it in the shell, he fastened into the pumpkin shell. That's why it now becomes a kli, and therefore he can go ahead and then draw forth water from the be'er, from the well. Masha'enkin over here, if he just places the stone on the chavis, that's not enough to elevate that stone to be now a kli. Rav Yosef, who taught the second statement, that means he taught that if it was placed, that the stone was placed b'mezid on the chavis, then that would make it so that it's a kisui, the mere placement of the stone. He says, we can ask on this halacha from our Mishnah. Im lav ein memalin bo. It says in the Mishnah that if the stone will not remain, so when he then puts the shell with the stone in it into the water, and it will fall, thereby it's not going to be a kli, whereby you cannot go ahead and metaltal it. So the mere placement of the stone in the shell makes it so that it's not going to be a kli. Similarly then, you would say the mere placement of the stone on the chavis would not make into a kli. That would be a kasha on me. Because in this statement that Rav Asi said to Rav Yochanan, that this means that it's a kisui, it's a kasha on what I'm saying. To which he says, Velohi, it's not a kasha. Why? Because Hasam kiven de loyhodka betule botla. Because if he did not fasten the stone into the pumpkin shell, so then basically we say that it's bottle. He's not interested in making it a kli, whereby he's merely storing the stone in the pumpkin shell, and that's why it's muktzah, you can't be metaltal. But over here in this case, where you put a stone on a chavis purposely, then it's a kisui. Ask the Gemara, b'mai kamifli, what is the machloikis between Rav Ami, the first statement, and Rav Asi, the latter statement, and then Rav Yochanan? Mar saver ba'ina maise, umar saver loy ba'ina maise. Rabbi Ami requires a maise. It's not good enough just to place the stone on the chavis, and therefore it's a basir davar aser. Whereas Rav Asi says by placing the stone alone, it doesn't need a maisa. The very fact that you just put it there, you designate it to be your kli, that's sufficient, and therefore it's a kisui. The Ozdu l'tamai, the Gemara explains, and they both go according to their own reasoning. Dechi osir Rav Dimi am Rabbi Chanina, va'amrei lo am Rabbi Zeira am Rabbi Chanina. Either Rav Dimi said in Rabbi Chanina, or it was Rabbi Zeira that said in Rabbi Chanina. Pam achas holach Rebbe lemokim echad. One time Rebbe went to a certain place, umotze nidbach shel avonim, and on Erev Shabbos he saw a row of stones. V'omar letalmidav tzu v'chashvu k'dei sheneshiv aleim lemocha. He said to his talmidim, go and have intent on these stones, so that tomorrow we can go ahead and move them when we give a shiur tomorrow. And the talmidim are going to then go ahead and sit and move the stones. They can put it in the formation they will want tomorrow on Shabbos. And Rebbe did not need a maisa. The very fact that he then had intent that the stone should be used as a kli, that was sufficient. So the intent, according to this version of what Rebbe did, was sufficient. Rabbi Yochanan Omar hitzrichon Rebbe l'maisa. Rabbi Yochanan argues on that which Rabbi Chanina said, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Rebbe needed more than just intention. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says he needed to do a maisa. My Omarlu. So what did he say to his Talmidim? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Ami Omar Tzu V'Lamdum Omarlu. Rabbi Ami said that he said to his Talmidim, go and organize the stones now on Erev Shabbos, so that tomorrow they'll be situated in such a way that you can go ahead and sit on them during the shiur without having to move them. In other words, Rav Ami said that you could not go ahead and then make these stones into a kli just by merely going ahead and moving them now. That's not sufficient to make a stone into a kli. That's Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Asi Omar Tzu'u v'shafshefum Omarlu. Rabbi Asi, however, said that Rebbe told his Talmidim, go and clean out the stones from the dust. That itself, that shifshuf alone, is enough to make them into a kli, whereby tomorrow you go ahead and then reformat and make a different formation of the stones, whereby the Talmidim can sit comfortably the way they would want. So each one is l'shitosoi. Rav Ami says that you have to do a maisa. It's not sufficient just to then go ahead and move a stone. That doesn't make into a kli. Rav Asi says by then doing a maisa, right, that's sufficient by cleaning it in this case to make it into a kli. Itmar, the Gemara brings the following, showing that there's different versions of what had happened. What we're talking about were not necessarily a row of stones. Rabbi Yossi ben Shol Omar Svar Shel Koros Have. It wasn't a row of stones, but rather it was a stack of karos, of beams. Rabbi Yochanan ben Shol Omar Geshosh Shel Svina Hava. That it was actually a Geshosh Shel Svina. Geshosh Shel Svina is a wooden pole that the person that would be situated in the front of the svina of the boat, and he would then take this long pole and he would feel the water to determine whether the boat is heading into then shallow water, to make sure it doesn't go into too shallow of a water, to then maintain that it's in a depth and that the ship should not become shipwrecked. So he says we're talking about a geshoish over here. That's the item that Rebbe was talking about to his Talmidim. So Gemara says, Man da Omer Geshoish, Kol Shekain Svar. The one who says that we're talking about a Geshoish, then Kol Shekain Svar, because the person is more particular about the Geshoish. Uman da Omer Svar, Aval Geshoish Kapid Alei. But the one who says Svar, he would not say Geshoish, because a Geshoish is something that a person is makpid. The owner doesn't want it to become curved and bent out of shape, and therefore he's very makpid to put it aside, and has a status that is going to be muktzah of a klish machmas chisaron kiss, and he's miyached loy mokom, and therefore, even though, again, the one who said we're talking about a svar, he would not agree that we're talking about a geshosh. The Gemara now goes on to the next case of the Mishnah about a zmara. The zmara, we said that if a person takes the zmara, the vine, and he ties it to a small jug as a pail in order to then bring forth water, that's going to then make the vine something that's viable as a kli on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Keshura in, the Gemara's medayik, that the Mishnah said that you tied the vine to the jug. Loi keshura loi, but if you did not tie it, then it's not going to be a kli. So Gemara says, Leima masnisin, let us suggest that our Mishnah is the loy Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The Tanya, for Rabbi Shimon Gamliel taught, or it says in the Brisa first, Choriyo shel dekel, shegodron le'etzim, if a person cuts the branches of a dekel tree in order to then use them for firewood, v'nimlach aleim the yeshiva, and he then decided he wanted to change his mind, instead of using it for firewood, he wants to use it to sit on as a mat. Tzorich likshor. So according to the Tanakama, you have to then make a kesher into the branches. Otherwise, it remains something that's muktzah as firewood. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Oimer ain't sorry likshor. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says it's not necessary to then tie them. The very fact that he changed his mind and decided he's going to use these branches to sit on, that can then make these branches, he's doing this before Shabbos, to then make these branches into something that he can sit on, and they'll then be able to then be moved on Shabbos. Rav Sheishes, Afilu Teimo, you can even learn that our Mishnah is also Rav Shimon Gamliel, although our Mishnah requires that one ties the vine to the jug, but still Rav Shimon Gamliel would agree to that. Why? Because because our Mishnah is talking about where the vine is still attached to the grapevine, and therefore it wouldn't be a viable kli unless you tie it, you do a maisa by tying it to the jug. And therefore, even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would agree that it would be muktzah otherwise. And therefore, the Mishnah is meduyak that you must be kosher the zmara, the vine, to the tafiach. Ask the Gemara, ihochi, if that's the case, that we're talking about something that's attached to the grapevine, so even if you indeed then were kosher it, but there's a problem. We know that the Chachamim made a gezerah that one person can't climb a tree, for example, and he can't even lean on a tree, because if it's something that he's going to lean on or climb on, he may very well then take off a branch, and therefore be in Isser Deraisa of Koitzer of Ktsira. So the Chachamim said that when it comes to Mechuber Lakarka, you can't Meshamesh boy. So how can you Meshamesh in a grapevine that's attached to the ground? This vine is attached to the grapevine that's attached to the ground. Answers the Gemara, Lamata Bishloish Mishloish. We're talking about where it's within 3 tefachim of the ground. We say Lavud, and therefore it has the status of being part of the ground. We don't have the Isser of being Meshamesh Bemechuber Lakarka. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi says, Afilu Teimo Bitflusha. Rav Ashi says, you don't have to learn that our case of the Zmora is talking about that it is tied to a grapevine which is attached to the ground. It could be even not attached to the ground. And still, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would agree that it has to be tied in our Mishnah. Why? As follows. Gezerah Shema Yaktam. Because if it's a long vine, so there's a concern that a person might decide that he wants it to be a shorter vine. What's he going to do? He then may cut the vine to make it a shorter piece. And thereby, if he does that, then he'll be over an Isser Diaraisa of making a Kli of Makeh Bepatish and Shabbos. So therefore, in order for then to then make sure that that's not the case, it's required that it be tied to the Tefiach before Shabbos. The Gemara now turns its focus to the latter part of the Mishnah, which is another subject altogether. We saw that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim in regards to a pekak hachaloin. Do we say that it's considered to be an Isser D'Rabbanan to be moisif on the binyan, because therefore it's called also like being part of the takana of being boine and oil arai? According to Rabbi Eliezer, that if it's a pekak hachaloin that is not attached and not hanging from the structure, then we would say it's part of the Isser D'Rabbanan of oil arai. But according to the Chachamim, it doesn't require to be attached and kosher to the and hanging from the structure. Even if it's not, still by putting a pekak hachaloin, that's not considered to be part of this Isser D'Rabbanan of oil arai. Explains the Gemara. Omar Rabbi Bar Bar Chanan Rabbi Yochanan Hakol Moedim she'ein oisin oil arai betchila b'yomtiv ve'in tzarich lom b'shabbos. Everybody agrees, both the Chachamim with Rabbi Eliezer, that indeed making an oil arai is an Isser D'Rabbanan. That's for sure. Whether it's on Yontif or on Shabbos, that's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Again, when it comes to making a binyan, that's for sure the malach of boine. Even when it comes to making an oil keva, that's also a tolda, and that's an Isser D'Oraisa of malacha boine. But an oil arai is midirabanan, and everybody agrees you cannot make an oil arai not on Yontiv and not on Shabbos. Lo nechlaku ela lo hoisiv. Our Mishnah is discussing a machlokes of being moisif on this binyan. Is this considered to be part and parcel of the dirabanan takana of oil arai? Now we're not talking about making a fixed structure on the binyan. We're not talking about that's for sure going to be part of the binyan. That's going to be an Isser D'Oraisa. Over here we're talking about being moisif, something that's temporary, in this case a pekak hachaloin, which you can take it off and put it back on. Here Rabbi Eliezer says that it has to have two requirements, that it be kosher and also be tolu. When it comes to a haisafa, so he says that it would be also if it doesn't have these two requirements of kesher and tolui. Whereas the Chachamim say that it's mutter, it's not part of the takana of oil arai.